The Institute for Studies in Asian Church and Culture is now offering formal courses and non-formal courses on transformational development, business and social entrepreneurship, and intercultural studies through the Asian School for Transformational Development. ASTRAD integrates both cultural and spiritual sensitivity into the theory and practice of development and is rooted in the cultures of Asia. ASTRAD seeks to build a new generation of Asian leaders who will serve holistically by combining executive skills and servanthood with faith-based compassion and deep understanding of integral mission. For more information about ASTRAD, email us at isaccglobal@gmail.com or marie@isacc.net.
Magandang gabi po sa ating lahat. At kami po ngayon ay nagagalak na kasama natin si Professor Ron galing sa UP Los Baños. Maganda po na pag-usapan natin yung ano po yung mga operative na values ng mga Pilipino. Dahil sa totoo lang, tayo pong mga edukado, hindi natin masyadong alam. Wala po tayong enough self-awareness ng ano talaga yung mga values, lalo na sa ating mga komunidad. So tonight, we will have si Ron give us a short presentation tungkol dito based on his research. At inaanyayahan po namin ang lahat for these conversations on faith and society.
Ang atin pong panauhin ay isang human ecologist, political economist at the Department of Social Development Services, College of Human Ecology, sabi nga po namin sa University of the Philippines, Los Baños. Siya po ay 5 taon ng profesor, engaging in various research and technical assistance projects and programs for local communities, local government units, national government agencies, and international organizations. Siya po ay nagtuturo ng social policies, climate change, adaptation and disaster risk reduction in human ecosystems, sustainability science, among others. Napakahusay at maraming kaalaman ang ating panauhin ngayon. Siya po ay nagbibigay ng kanyang oras, no? Yung kanyang free time, kung meron pa ba, Sir Ron? Kung meron man, ay binibigay niya ito sa Rotary Club of Los Baños at Rotary International District 3820, where he is the past president and current editor-in-chief. So hindi ko na po papatagalin. I-welcome po natin mga kasama sa ISIP-ISAK si Sir Ron Dangkalan. Sir Ron, magandang gabi sa iyo.
Magandang gabi po, Ma'am Joy, no? And Doc Melba, Mai, and everyone. And of course, our audience who are here. So the title of the presentation is Values That Matter in Halalan 2021. But this, rather than a theoretical conversation of values, I'd like to also understand what are the values that are important today, no? As they are applied to issues. And of course, it's not just the values that we are familiar with, no? At least among us that we always see, no? But the values also of people whom we might have who might have a very different political opinion than us. Okay, so in this presentation, we look into democracy, and democracy has been there for a few hundred years, diba? So of course there are very ancient roots of democracy. But the way in which Republican democracy has been there came from the Americans. No, they adopted it from the Romans. It was applied to us, and of course, no, democracy has been the major political system in the world today, and including sa democracy, isang important na principle ng democracy is yung election, no? Our ability to choose our political leaders. But democracy is also about not just empowering people and allowing them to make decisions on who will be our leaders. But democracy, ang assumption is because many of us are actually engaged in that process of selecting, we might have selected the best, no, to actually govern the collective. But democracy in the 21st century, especially right now in the Philippines, we have social media. And social media has a very profound influence on the way in which we do our elections right now. When you look at some statistics in the Philippines, why do I like to begin with this? Because I think our values and the way we work together and on how we operate that values, lalo na ngayong pandemic na hindi tayo nagkita-kita, the social media is our platform, no? Where we can actually live that values and be able to actually operationalize that values given also the limitation caused by the pandemic. So in the Philippines, there are around 73 million people who are using the internet, and our internet penetration rate is about 67%. There are 80 million social media users. You can see the disparity between internet users and social media users because it takes into account double accounts. No? Minsan isang tao, dalawang account. So there are 80 million social media users. When you look at the 2020 to 2021 increase, it has increased dramatically both in terms of internet users and social media users. So it just shows how much the internet is actually gaining pace in our country. And of course, why am I showing this fact? Because as the pandemic has limited our interactions now that are physical. So the way we interact now is in a lot of ways through social media and through the internet. And if social media was influential in the past election, now the COVID election, I think social media is even more relevant. Yeah? So some guide questions in this presentation. What are values and why they matter in Halalan 2020? And if we understand these values, particularly applied values, how can we agree to disagree? And that's a principle of democracy, right? So we agree to disagree instead of fighting one another, instead of killing one another. We agree to disagree and talk about politics and truly listen to people whom we might not agree with. And that is the purpose of what I wanted to do right now. It's really about listening. And of course, how do we move forward as a nation in terms of our values and politics? So applied values. As an academic, of course, there's a lens that I'd like to use. You know? And I'd like to introduce you to the transdisciplinary lens. When you say transdisciplinary, we talk about trans, diba? It means that there is transcendence. You transcend beyond disciplines. So the conversation now is not just within discipline, between discipline, across disciplines, but it can be beyond discipline and outside discipline. So people in the community are empowered, no? And they are legitimate sources of knowledge, not just the knowledge that exists within the academia, but knowledge that exists beyond or even outside academic discipline. That's why it's trans, we transcend. And that's a human ecological perspective. No? But what Human Echo does is look at the near home, the intimate, and the political realities, the personal experience of people as they interact with the political system. So that is the kind of perspective that I'd like to bring. That's why in this presentation, we will hear some of the sides of people, the sides of people and their narratives, and we will process that eventually. No? So what are values? Because I think it's very important to first come up with a definition. So values are principles, fundamental convictions, their ideas, standards, or life stances. And the most important thing is that they guide behavior. Because they become our reference point when we decide, when we evaluate our beliefs, and when we evaluate our action. So rather than making this talk theoretical, we look at how these values are applied, and how are they playing out in this election. Okay, so in this talk, I will go into I will use values to analyze the divisions and our political fault lines. Why is Dutertismo popular, and how do we move forward? In the process, I had guided conversations with friends. Actually, this is more of just conversations, and what I'd like to more of a sharing of what I got from conversations with friends, with colleagues, and most of them are really most of them are supporters of the people that I talk to, at least are supporters of this administration. But I think it was very humbling as a process. Kaya nga sinasabi ko kanina with the organizers, in this process of the talk, it was very humbling for me to also listen to the sides of people whom I do not necessarily agree with politically, but I'm very much willing to hear their side. And, I learned so much in the process of hearing them. And of course, this is the hearing the narrative of our kapwa. Because for the longest time, I think what social media does to us is that you can easily make comments, diba, on people that you don't necessarily meet. And we can make quick judgment. It's so quick, everything is so quick that it has been ripe for othering. And there's always a problem when you treat the other person as othering. Kanya-kanya, kami-kami, diba? When we're all Filipinos, when we're all human beings. And I think it's very important to understand that concept of kapwa, and I think many of you are familiar, that in the Philippines, our understanding of kapwa is an extension of ourselves. No? It's a very beautiful thing about our culture, that our kapwa is not an other, but it's actually an extension of ourselves. So in this process of presenting the data later on, let us dive into hearing the narrative of our kapwa, even if that kapwa does not necessarily agree with our political stance. Now, I ask in these conversations that I ask people, why are we divided as a country? And these are the themes that came out. There's the influence of social media, there's polarization, we have assumptions on one another, the fact checkers are biased, truth is more contested than ever. Of course, the control of information, there's ethno-linguistic divisions, and of course, I think what surprised me the most is this. So the influence of social media, these are verbatim statements. All that I will be presenting here are verbatim statements. Social media is a big factor because it gives validation, regardless if it's true or not. No, there's sensationalization, and the people who are talking here, of course, are I don't say supporter of the administration, but they appreciate what the administration is doing. But what they're saying is that there's a validation aspect in social media that is part of why we are very divided, because it feeds your ego. Social media plays a big role in making information available. They appreciate the information because it's readily available. As I said, when you look at the facts that I showed earlier, in terms of social media, we have 80 million users in our country. And for that 80 million, majority of them are spending their time online and social media. Information becomes readily available and laymanized on Facebook and TikTok. Information that used to be discussed academically. And I think social media has also changed the way we consume media. Before, it's one way with TV, diba? You cannot talk to the person who is there speaking on television. But right now with social media, it's two-way. No? It feeds your ego, it gives you validation, but at the same time you can talk and you have voice also. No? And you can talk to the magazine, to the news organizations. It becomes two-way. And then there's such a thing as free Facebook, because while we have internet, there's still free Facebook. What does free Facebook mean? Free Facebook means that you can surf on Facebook, but you cannot surf outside of Facebook in Google and on news sites. So people rely on captions, and captions are a big factor. And they say comprehension in politics are bad. Not necessarily that I agree with the statement, because these are verbatim. This is not from you. Huwag niyo akong awayin. But ang sabi nila, caption, because you rely on captions, right? So even with incomplete information, people makes decisions. No? Okay. There's also polarization. And I think in terms of values, this is very important, because people are very clear with their stance, and they're not just very clear, but very hardcore with their stance. So those who were against are hardcore, and those who were for Duterte are also hardcore. Yung iba, religious na people, masyado na dogmatic, no? Parang religiously they love Duterte. And regardless of what he did, he was treated like a puong, no? Puong Nazareno. So I think maybe there's a cultural, I don't know, no? That there is something that they can they have an affinity with. I don't like to overinterpret it, but this is how it came out in the verbatim statements of the people I talked to. There's also assumptions on one another. And I think, again, verbatim ito na kinuha ko. Bakit daw sila galit na galit doon sa mga tao from the opposition? Because it is assumed that they do not read the news. And nakakasakit. Sinabi dito, this is verbatim, napakasakit na if my side ka and the side supports the administration, you don't read the news. Not necessarily that I agree with this, but ang sabi lang nila, I was surprised because I was surprised, no? Because this is something that I do not consider about those people who are appreciative of the government. Na nasasaktan sila when people think that they're not reading the news. Because sabi niya, we do, no? And for 5 years, they are calling the DDS as bobo. No? But these are the same people na nililigawan nila for Lenny. These are the same people you convince how to win them over. Sinaktan mo ego nila, you do not listen to these people. Gusto nyo, kayo lang magaling. It was very humbling and eye-opening for me also to learn na ganun pala ang tingin nila kasi kayo lang ang magaling. Diba? And that is why we are divided. Kagaya niyan, guwapo for Lenny, lawyers for Lenny. Sino victims nito? Filipinos who are uneducated. Oh, magagaling na naman. Sila na naman may power dito. Dito na lang kami sa leader, si Duterte, magsama-sama kami. And also the team that came out and talking to them is that controversy and chismis. Sabi nila, Filipino is very much into controversy. And lalo na yung hidden wealth ni Marcos. So there are many versions of the truth that are coming out on TikTok and FB and parang fiesta, no? Because it's a chismis. The other one also I think that is very interesting, and I think it's not just in the Philippines, but what is really the truth? No? At sabi dito, facts are subjective. So when the news says that Marcos killed people, they interview biased people. They did not interview people who are objective or neutral. Because I think it is very interesting. Of course, I don't just want to read into the statement, but it's also interesting because it's happening around the world. Fake news and the assumptions that truth and bias are everywhere. Of course, it has been there forever. But I think we are living, there are some news articles and there are some philosophers are saying that we are living in a post-truth world, no? With postmodernism, etc. What is truth if everything is socially constructed? I'm not saying that I agree with this, but this is, I think, a dilemma now when there's no longer a truth. When I was doing my literature class many years ago, one of our professor, it was about Russia during the time of Dostoevsky and Chekhov, no? So there were a lot of changes. And in one of the lectures, my professor said that the worst kind of worship is the worship of the God within. Because if you don't subject yourself to any objective truth anymore, then ako na yung nag-create ng truth. Everything, all the truth I dictate on my own terms. And I think I find it very difficult now to also look into a world where the truth is created by people that we don't have any objective truth anymore. Magkakagulo talaga. Diba? There's also perceived double standards. Ito yung nakita ko na, again, verbatim. Why is news like Rappler one-sided? If Mocha Uson shares a fake news, they will never forgive her. But if Rappler shares a fake news, it just slips through. If Mocha shares a fact, they are dismissed immediately. Si Sasot, if meron siyang share na fact, we brand them with certain assumptions already. So if we think that those supporters of Duterte are close-minded, what about our own close-mindedness? I'm not saying that they're right. No, of course, I don't agree that they're right. No, na ito yung mga supporters, because I think we also need to take a very strong stance when human dignity is abused. But I think maganda rin ang pakinggan natin. If we think of them and we brand them with certain assumptions that they are always fake, no? But what about us, no? Do we also have our own bias, blind spots? And fact checkers and biases. They said that fact checkers are biased in the first place. Maria Ressa is against the government, and there's already a label that she is biased. Again, I do not agree with this, but it came out, and this is how they think. And I think it should make us think also. No? Social media is very divisive. Why is Rappler mainit sa mata ng DDS? Because nasa mindset na rin ng tao from the side of the administration daw na incomplete ang information na binibigay ng Rappler. Siguro if it comes to third party, dapat daw ang magiging fact checker ay hindi bias or hindi kumbaga hindi identified na against the government. They are clear already about their stance daw ang UP and Ateneo, even universities. So we need an unbiased voters education campaign. Control of information. Ang sabi dito, social media highlighted that institutions that were perfect before were unmasked through social media channels. Sabi pa dito nung nakausap ko, do not claim to be perfect because you have scandals and issues too. Issues are brought on the person. There's a loss of moral ascendancy of our institutions because right now in social media, all the informations can be out, di ba? So previously, during the age of television, information is one way. But right now, information is everywhere. Information can spread very fast. And the image that were carefully developed by our institutions and our politicians and the people who are saying a lot, no, are now being, yung crystallized identity are being shattered according to them. And also social media became an avenue for all classes to be equal. It was a great equalizer because before, people from only from the elites and those who studied in famous schools would speak. Now everyone has the chance, sorry for the word, has the chance to be able to express their opinion. So I think social media has also opened the gateway for everyone to speak up. There's also ethno-linguistic division. It affects their political choices. If I'm an Ilocano, you vote for that. If I'm in Manila, I will still vote for an Ilocano because I can relate to him in terms of worldview. If I am an Iglesia, I will vote who the church dictates. Voters are about people whom they can relate with. So I think relatability is very important. Of course, I don't want to go, I think the historians and the anthropologists, sociologists will discuss more on the concept of nationhood and how these different nations, actually we're called nations, no? Maraming nations before the Spaniards created one state, no, within us. So I think they can discuss that. But I think for me, what I would like to emphasize is the importance of relatability. And then there's this private morality versus public morality. Sabi dito, there are Christians and Catholics who do not believe in killing privately, but they are willing to let it go for the greater good. Killing would benefit the people. And this is pertaining to the war on drugs. Some people, they do not believe in killing privately. But in public, pwede. Di ba? Because it would benefit the people. And I think this is a very important thing. I don't want to know anything, but I think it's something that should make us think, di ba? From here. And why is Duterte popular? So we're done with divisions. Now the second question is why Duterte is popular. And these are the themes that came out. Okay, let's go one by one. They're tired of elitist politics. Ito ang sinabi. Again, word per word, not mine. Nagpalit ng kulay, but the people around her like Kiko are still yellow. I don't know. And you know, it surprised me because I'm not for the administration. I'm against the administration. But you know, it really surprised me as well that they are allergic. No, those people who are a little bit more appreciative of Duterte are allergic to that to the Liberal Party. We need healing. Tama naman si Lenny eh. But the problem is not if it is not effective because the people around her are the same. They're still part of the Liberal Party. And you know, in my article in the Inquirer, this is deviating away from what the person said, no? And hindi na ako na boses nung tao na kausap, but it's more of my own analysis already. You know, I was saying this already before, even in my Inquirer articles, that Lenny really, no, the Liberal Party can be a baggage for her even, no, because if we want to win the election, we should not just win those in her support base, but even win those on the other side. And a lot of people that I talk to, they like Lenny, but they don't like her being associated with Liberal Party. And it's also, politics is also a game of numbers. And I think this is something that maybe they should think about very well. Okay? And the people who will appreciate institutional reforms are those who understand the government processes. But dun sa laylayan, they would not care. There are still divisions there. We can minimize division, but at the level of normal people, the strength of the agencies is not enough. So I think they were talking about institutional reform because post-EDSA, we're talking about institutional reform. We're talking about democracy. Pero ang dami pa rin mahirap. No? And I think this is something that we have to think about. Also, ito yung sinabi nila, perceive direct and immediate action. So they think of Duterte as the Duterte government made people feel that the government is working in its experience on the ground. Ito basahin ko isa-isa because I was really surprised as well, no, with the statement. And yeah, tingnan natin. But ilagay ko perceived, di ba? Direct nila na feel yung ginawa ni Duterte. I went to Manila few months after the election. Out of curiosity, hindi ko pa masyado nagta-taxi noon. Never ako nag-commute. Few months ko, I asked every taxi drivers, may na-feel po ba kayo? There were a couple of taxi drivers who said, we can now enter Tondo because before we could not enter Tondo. And then, totoong tao branding. So this value is very important on them. You show who you are, magpakatotoo ka. Whether you accept me, ganito akong klase ng tao eh. So that's the branding daw of Duterte. That kind of person, even if Duterte is nagmumura, it might not be moral, but he's understood because at least totoong tao siya, hindi siya ipokrito. That is why popular si Duterte. And again, I was surprised. Because of course, I was thinking about this already, but I could not articulate it as well as they did. No? So that's why it's very important that we listen, even if we don't agree to people. Because, you know, I was surprised with the wisdom here. Sabi pa nung isa, may one blogger ako napakinggan. He sees his grandfather in Duterte. Nagmumura but stricto pero mahal ka niya. Because, you know, a lot of politicians, pabango lahat, no, pag election, pero they steal from people. But despite his promises na di natupad, at least inamin niya at sinabi niya nagpakatotoo siya. Wala siya mga reasoning na hindi naman talaga kaya. He speaks his mind. With that kind of persona that Duterte has, ganun pa rin kataas ang rating niya. Ganun dating niya sa mga Pilipino. Again, this is not necessarily something that I agree with, but this came out nonetheless. Charisma and perception of being a new breed of politician. Masyadong bago si Duterte. First Mindanao president. No? Sorry, mali yan. First, kamay na bato. Andyan pa rin ang corruption and drugs, mahirap baguhin. Walang perfect na politician, but he has the charisma. No? And charisma is very important because the impression that it gives on people. And ito surprised me as well. The appeal of being ape. Actually, we're close to the end of my presentation. Pero ito, I was surprised again. It came from a Duterte supporter, someone who likes Duterte. No? Mahilig ang Pinoy sa ape. The fact na ulit-ulit ang story na inaape, so Duterte marunong mag-play. Kung wari daw magkakasakit, matanda na ako, sabi ng iba, mag-resign ka na. But Duterte becomes api. Supporter of Lenny, inaapi nila lalo si Duterte. So the supporters become harder with support. It's the telenovela storyline that people likes the api. So what are the ways forward? So this is how I end the presentation already. I think it's very important that we use kind words. If we go down the level, yung conversation na ginagawa ng mga supporters, and even those yung hardcore on the part of the opposition, then I think it will make the polarization wider. The other side, important thing is understanding. Sometimes we decide based on a rule of thumb. No? Rule of thumb. We create certain assumptions already about those who support Duterte. I'm not saying again, kaya ko inuulit-ulit, baka pagod na kayo na, ba't mo sasabing you don't agree? No, I don't agree with it, but it really is humbling to listen also from the other side, even if we disagree with them. Because the moment that we understand where their story is coming from, doon natin ma-design yung ating strategy, yung ating policy design that is actually responsive to the need of the other side. And of course, we need genuine political reforms. People put their faith on Duterte, on people like Duterte, because quick may perception of quick. Not necessarily, again, quick in terms of real outcomes kung titignan natin, kung susumahin natin. But may perception, no? Yun ang branding, na quick. We really need political reforms that are genuine. And we need a bureaucracy that delivers social services rather than just getting elected. We need also innovation and impact. New brand and new kind of politics. And of course, due process. Sabi nito, ang ways forward coming from the people that I talk to, do not call the people who support Duterte bobo because you attack the voters kaya mas lumalaki ang division. These are some of the thoughts that I gathered coming from the people who were more appreciative of the government. And of course, I have my own political opinions, but again, in the process of really listening on what values matter to them, and also listening to them and thinking, can we also consider them for what they are and see kung when we consider them for what they are, doon tayo makaka-design ng klase ng interventions, klase ng policies, klase ng community action that is more inclusive. Because I think the call for inclusiveness requires listening to the other side, even if it's painful for us to listen. How can we somehow build a bridge, and how can we create a way so that we can unite our country? And we think of elections as games of numbers. We quantify it too much in terms of prediction, but values are also very important. Yes, yun lang po at maraming salamat.
Nagkalat na ang fake news sa social media. Let us fight fake news with the good news of our faith in Christ. Join our social media network and be an advocate of truth for the Philippines and for God's kingdom. We are looking for volunteers in the areas of content creation, research, graphic design, and video editing. To join, send a message to aprilpalyaria.isacc@gmail.com.
Ayan. Mula kay Timothy Ngo, it seems like trying to convince one position to change another is as strong as the dogmatism of religious people. Does that mean that might as well convince the neutrals to our side than make convincing those of the other positions a long-term project like a discipleship program?
Yes, I think, Ma'am Joy, no, that is very true. No? Some people are very hardcore already, and it's very, very hard to convince them and win them over. And I do agree with Pastor, no, with that you really have to work towards the neutral as well. But again, very important to listen. Who are the hardcores? And the people that we assume as hardcore, are they really hardcore? Diba? Because sometimes, of course, yeah, yun yung magandang tanong eh. Because I'm sure that out there are really hardcores. But before we tell them that they're hardcore, maybe it's also very good to engage in a very genuine conversation and to do the listening to them. Because I think, what humbled me in this process, normally, alam niyo naman ako, I'm a political economist, gusto ko yung argument, di ba? But in this process of making this presentation, I just listened and do not share my view. And, I was surprised more than anything because the people that I thought were hardcore were not as hardcore as I thought.
Ayun. So, sabi mo nga, sa simula pa lang, hearing the narrative of our kapwa. Making sure that we hear them too. Tanong naman po ni Teacher Neth, could it be that kaya ganyan ang perception ng mga tao is because of the misuse of social media by propagandists and how they manipulate the emotions ng mga Filipino?
Of course, may strategy talaga. And we know that the administration is strategizing very, very well. Yun yung gusto ko sabihin eh. The administration is strategizing very, very well. Kaya dapat yung opposition, and of course, sila Lenny, should also strategize equally good, no? Or equally better, if not better. Because again, politics is a game of strategy. But how can you strategize if hindi mo alam kung ano yung other side? Tingin ko lang po ang tao pagod na sa division. Pagod na sila sa pagkakawatak-watak. If makita natin na si Lenny, kung sino man, ay very bringing people together, even the people that they disagree with, I think it is really the antithesis of an administration that thrives on division. Because kailangan, kung sino man yung politiko na yan na susunod, they should be the antithesis of what is the kind of politics that we have now.
Well, that makes very good sense, Ron, no? Kasi if you look at how the politicians, especially the presidentiables, brand themselves now, ang tawag sa kanila ay the unifying leader, the healing president. So, and nag-aagawan yata sila sa term na yan. So I think what you said is really being played out, no, when we look at the strategies that they do now sa politics. So Ron, you mentioned about the need for a leader who is the antithesis of a very divisive political life that we have now. And, I relate that to what our Psikolohiyang Pilipino people would call the pagkakaisa, which is, it's a value that's so important to us. Sir Ron, paano nga natin ito, ano yung cure nga natin sa polarization? You mentioned about kindness. You mentioned about trying to hear and understand. How do we do this, Sir Ron? How do we put this into practical, everyday steps that our friends from ISIP-ISAK can do and can practice?
Apo. I think siguro yung really to be able to listen genuinely. I think yun nga, kahit sa comment, if there are people who comment that we think that they're out of bounds. Hindi natin to ka-radar. No? So even the people that we think are saying the different thing, no? I think we have to, it doesn't mean that we agree with them, but it doesn't mean that kailangan matamaan tayo, but we need to acknowledge their side. And I think yun yung una, really listening. The other one is to really engage in a conversation, even if we think that the person is hardcore. I think it's so important na we really engage in a conversation with them, no? And we use kind languages rather than tawagin natin bobo, tawagin natin ano. Kaya ako sa mga estudyante ko, pag naririnig ko sa social media na nagtatawag kayo ng bobo, lalo na taga-UP kayo, kasi hindi ko naman pinapagalitan, pero inaano ko, no? Kinakausap, iproseso natin yan. Kasi mas lalong nabibuild tuloy yung sabi na intellectual elites ang mga taga-UP. Kaya yan yung lagi kong sinasabi lalo sa mga estudyante sa social policy na ito talaga yung topic namin na hindi kasi kailangan na kung nakita nila na ang yabang-yabang mo na ikaw ang magaling, mas lalo kang kagagalitan. The other Ma'am Joy, no, na I would like to emphasize, personal responsibility is very good, no? We think personal responsibility natin to be kind, but also there are things as systemic factors that is beyond our control. Kasi kahit sabihin mo man na unifying ka, kung gutom pa rin yung tao, paano yun? 'Di ba? Kasi that's the other side. I believe in the everyday, but in the everyday, in the daily changes in our lives, pero yung naging sakit natin, na ikulong na natin yung politics to the everyday. 'Di ba? At ang binigyan mo ng burden na sobra, yung private, the private sphere, but what about the public that we also need to demand accountability with? Of course, hindi yan mutually exclusive, both yan, no? But I think kahit anong kaya nga siguro nakita nyo doon yung sinabi ko sa akin, si Duterte hindi ipokrito. Yun ang sabi ng supporters. Hindi siya ipokrito. At ikabit mo yun sa nararamdaman on the ground, yung pagbabago. Kasi, di ba, totoo naman na ang daming adik ang natakot sa kanya nung una. Ay, medyo nakalimutan na. Pero, kailangan din natin genuine, uniting, pero tingin ko, while we aspire for long-term reforms are very important. Maganda yun. But we also emphasize on the current need. Yung mga taong gutom, paano matutulungan. Kasi sobrang binash natin in development practice the short term. Of course, totoo yun. Hindi naman talaga maganda na short-termist ka lang. Maganda long-term ka din. Pero paano pag gutom na yung tao? Anong gagawin mo? Di ba? Pag yung tao fearful dahil hindi niya alam kung may krimen sa ano niya. So, I think we have to also think about it, di ba? Na yung kailangan, meron kang long term, pero you also address the now. Di ba? Uniting ka, pero may gagawin ka rin for the now. Kasi yun nga even in development theory and practice, binabash natin yung short-termism. But the populists are thriving on short-termism. So, yun lang po. Maganda mga pag-isipan natin.
Well, that's true, Sir Ron. Tama ka dyan. At yun nga, no, I hope that the ones that have the good intentions para sa bayan are taking down notes or are listening on this, no? Not just on this conversation, but on what the public is trying to convey, yung mensahe ng kanilang actions at ng kanilang mga salita. Sir Ron, I have here a comment. I just want to surface this, no? Sabi ni Sir Arthur Alvendia, sabi niya, while you were presenting, sabi niya, it's remarkable that the presenter admits that he is humbled by the views and judgment of the masses who favor the administration. Does this reveal his bias in favor of the opposition's beliefs and values? Does this not reveal the great disconnect of the opposition, not only with the people, but with the reality?
I think very nice. No? I think it's very good. In the first place, there's no human beings who is not biased. No? Because we have an objective part, no? But we also have subjectivity, di ba? Sino ka, paano ka pinalaki, saan ka na gano. So you always have subjectivity. There's no such thing as no bias. No? You only become unbiased if you're a machine. But if you're a human being, an agent na also influenced by your society, you are biased. So I think what we can do is to minimize bias. And when we do this listening process, we are minimizing our bias. Yun yung una po sana na clear. Of course, and the other thing is we need to also make our stance. It doesn't mean that we listen and we consider all sides that we refuse to take a stance. Yun din naman yung problema pag masyado kang understanding of all perspective. Paano pag may violation na ng human dignity? Diba? So because you consider all sides, you forgot to take a stance on what is morally correct. Of course, there is that one. Lalo pag may killing na involved, at may abuse, di ba? You really have to make a stance. The other thing that I'd like to share is that tama, pero may point siya na tama. Meron din tayong blind spots. No? May blind spots. And I think that's what humbled me. Because of course, I would understand also. Sasabihin ko din na meron akong blind spot. Meron din akong mga certain assumptions na na-shatter in the process nung ginagawa itong presentation. And I think dapat ganun tayo lagi, no? That we, because of our listening process, meron tayong nasha-shatter na assumption about other people. And I think even the politicians who are yung meron na talagang hardcore na position, they should also listen. And I think I encourage not just Lenny supporters, pero yung supporter din na Duterte should also listen on the other side. And I think they will be surprised kung ano matututunan nila. Yeah.
That's right. And I totally agree, no? Every human being has a bias. In fact, facts are biased. Kaya pag sinasabi nila na fact checkers are biased, magandang paalalahanan na ang katotohanan ay meron laging papanigan, yung nagsasabi ng totoo. Sabi naman po ni Sir Leonil, which I'd like to give to you, Sir Ron, for comment. Sabi niya, later na lang yung bridge and reconciliation after elections. Ang paghihimok sa atin ni Sir Leonil is, what is needed to do now is to strategize how to win using truthful information and social influencers, perhaps social media influencers, or even warm bodies, no, yung mga social influencers indeed. If we lose this election to another round of nepotist and historical revisionist, it's the end. Yan ang komento ni Sir Leonil. What say you on these comments, these thoughts, Sir Ron?
Yung later na yung reconciliation. Medyo nagdadalawang isip po ako doon, yung later na yung reconciliation. Unang-una, if the politician are not, the opposition is not united, you have Lenny, you have Isko, you have a lot of people who are running. Divided na divided. Hindi ba tayo pwedeng magkaisa ng in one ticket? Pero yung pagkakaisa kasi, hindi rin pwedeng pilit. Hindi rin pwedeng pilit. Kasi, ang problema, nagkakaisa tayo ngayon dahil gusto natin manalo yung eleksyon. Pag nanalo si Lenny, tapos remember, you have the activist, you have the left, you have the capitalist na magkakasama. Kung titignan mo yung mga nagrarally behind her, yung iba mga hasyendero, di ba? Yung iba mga, and then you have the left, and you have the mag-aaway-away. Di ba? Eventually, mag-aaway-away yan. At pag nag-aaway-away yan, and even if manalo si Lenny, and there will be a breakdown again, in some years or now, we will confront the same populist na sinabi, tignan nyo, di ba? Tignan nyo, ganito yung nangyari. Kasi I think yun yung naging sakit ng demokrasya natin for the longest time. Ang demokrasya natin just to get elected. Pero after, wag na. Pero tama din, I agree with Sir Lionel, time is of the essence. Time is of the essence. Kailan ba ang election? May na, di ba? Ang dami nang pwedeng mangyari. So I think, but it's not an excuse to not really reach out and do reconciliation.
So, Sir Ron, your final words to our viewers.
Yun nga po, napakahalaga yung listening, yung pakikipagkapwa nating mga Pilipino, na yung kapwa, makinig tayo sa ating kapwa, Pero yun nga po yung sinasabi ko, it doesn't mean na kinonsider mo lahat ng opinion, lahat ng pananaw, hindi ka na magkakaroon ng desisyon, hindi ka na magkakaroon ng stance at ng prinsipyo. Tama, may bias lahat. Pero dapat ang bias natin sa dignity ng tao, yung pagrespeto sa pagiging tao. Kasi if human beings ay create, di ba, sa image and likeness ng Panginoon, may dignity tayo. Yun lagi ang bias natin. Kung hindi pwede na dahil nakikinig tayo sa lahat, paano pag may pinapatay? Meron ng inaapi, meron ng nagugutom, meron ng, di ba? So dapat the open-mindedness, tama po yun na nakikinig tayo. Pero our bias or our is always lagi dapat doon sa dignidad ng tao. Kung ito ba ay nire-respeto o hindi. Kasi alam niyo, fan ako ni Melba, ni Dr. Melba, di ba? So I think human beings were called really to action. Faith, of course, faith is what saves, but we are also called to act, no? Because of that, no? Because when you're transformed by your faith, it results into action, no? So yun lang po yung natin, yun yung gusto kong sabihin. Napaka-exciting ng election, but at the same time jittery. Maraming nakakatakot na pangyayari kung maulit pa yung another 6 years na ganito paano na ang Pilipinas. So dapat po talaga yung listening natin is also an opportunity for us to develop better strategies na inclusive at the same time ay para sa ikabubuti ng bansa natin. Yun lang po at salamat ng marami.
I think basically, totoo rin naman na we need to listen to yung defenders ng status quo. Kasi whether we are aware of it or not, meron silang dinidefend na value na importante sa kanila. Halimbawa, in relation sa mga DDS, they are defending yung pagka matotoo niya, no? Yung mukhang authentic kasi mukhang taong-tao, sabi nga nila, no? Now, that's a value na hindi naman necessarily wrong. Siguro ang call doon is yung we see to it na merong parity tayo. Kasi I think ang problema natin, ang tingin ng mga tao, lalo na kung ikaw Inglesero, elite. So siguro merong failure na mag-identify doon sa pagkatao ng mga tinatawag ng mga DDS. Yun na nga yung malaking insulto yung sinasabi na bobo sila and ganyan. Ano? So, I think part ng puwersa ng incarnation is we really establish parity sa mga tao. Halimbawa, yun nga, magpakatotoo dahil yun value sa kanila yun. Di magpakatotoo tayo na wala nang Inglesero masyado kung sila ang kausap. Yun ang ibig sabihin ng incarnation we identify deeply kung saan man sila nanggagaling. And affirm, no? Kasi meron silang dinidepend na value Narinig natin yung sinasabi nila. Pero I think we also don't lose identity. Ang ibig sabihin nun, yung same with the Lord Jesus became a human being just like us, ano? Kailangang matulog, kailangang kumain, and he grows tired like all of us. Pero at the same time, he did not cease to be God. Siguro yung sinasabi ni Ron kanina na we must carefully listen, pero at the same time, we do not surrender din yung ating mga prinsipyo. Kung ang mga prinsipyo na to ay natatapakan o nasasalin. Halimbawa, yung EJK. Yung EJK sa totoo lang, kung ikaw may kamag-anak, may kaibigan ka na napatay, na alam mo, hindi totoo. Kailangan ipaglaban yun. And hindi pwedeng we take cover doon sa yung idea ng greater good for the greater number. Sa totoo lang, hindi Christian yun na, na value Kasi sa Diyos, one lost sinner is important. Diba? Sabi, yun daw, as a shepherd, he will look for the 99 na nawala, no? Na naligaw. and he will leave the 99 and look for the one lost sheep. So ibig sabihin yun yung value ng isang individual. You cannot do social arithmetic na parang, hindi na baling patay mo yung ganito kasi anyway, it's for the good of everybody. Hindi pwede yun eh. Kasi we need to scramble uli, no? Yung mga idea natin ng what is the common good, idea natin what is the greater good, and who says that? Who says ito ang greater good? Yun ang dangerous dun eh. Yung isa pang issue ng what is truth. Merong grain of truth dun sa fact na lahat tayo subjective. In other words, sabi nga ng isang theologian, what we see as fact is actually a value. Interesado ka kasi doon dahil, it is of interest to you, so you see it as a value, as a fact. Pero kung hindi ka interesado doon, you don't even see it. Minsan, you gloss over it, no? So, totoo rin yun na what you consider a fact is actually a value for you. Mas sensitized ka doon sa mga bagay na may value sa iyo. Ngayon, pero hindi rin pwede yung pure subjectivity kasi while we recognize na lahat tayo may bias and nobody can say na I hold yung objective truth. Ano? Sa totoo lang, sa tingin ko, we need to have a bit more humility na hindi ako ganun ka-objective kasi I only see pieces of the truth, no? Now I see through a glass darkly, sabi nga ni Pablo. Hindi natin hawak yung lahat ng reality. We only see a slice of it. So, dapat konting humility ron, na totoo, I may be just as subjective as everybody else, no? That is one side. The other is also to say na hindi rin pwede yung pure subjectivity kasi may tinatawag na intersubjectivity. In other words, somebody will say, there are 5 cows out in the field, no? If it is an empirical fact, edi pwedeng lahat tayo pumunta ron out in the field, tingnan natin kung may 5 cows. Now, it's possible for all of us who go to the field, makita yung 5 cows, oo nga, 5 cows, edi merong ganong intersubjectivity. And that should be respected. At yung intersubjectivity na yun, hawak-hawak yan ng mga communities. So I think it's important na when we are thinking of speaking to our own people, how much of our people are actually people we understand? Minsan kasi tayong mga middle class, hindi tayo ganun ka-aware ng ano yung mga pinanghahawakan ng mga values ng ating mga kapwa-tao. Some of us have been so westernized na sa totoo lang, yung ating mga mental furniture, yung ating lingwahe, yung ating mga hindi na tayo makapasok dun sa intersubjectivity ng mga tao sa iba. So ngayon po sa atin, pag-isipan natin ng maigi, those of us who are nandun sa top ng cultural divide, pag-isipan natin ng maigi, paano natin i-incarnate ang sarili natin. Incarnational witness to eh. Paano tayo bababa, magiging incarnate, no? In such a way na nauunawaan natin kung saan ang gagaling ang mga tao. So, ganun lamang po. At pagpalain tayong lahat at salamat kay Ron for his own understanding ng what it means to listen carefully sa mga tao.